All right, welcome back. And so for this video, I want to talk about uh, best practices and looking back and saying, what are my current practices and are they best practices? And by that, I mean, for me, when I first got back into art and painting, I was doing a lot of drawing, I was doing a lot of designing, I was looking at different placements. And then as I got into watercolor, the same thing. And I realized early on that the drawing is where you're forging a relationship with your subject matter. And if you're going to continually do that same subject matter, like for me, I love to paint architecture and um, learning the different nuances, eventually I I'll know enough about architecture where I can like say I'll know what details to skip. But first I need to work that relationship, like different kinds of molding. Like everybody's familiar with crown molding inside of a house, but on the outside, sometimes on the inside too, you'll have what's called dentile molding. Dental is in teeth, it has like little teeth. Well, maybe you don't do that. Maybe that's just too many details and it's going to look like little dots. Or maybe you do every other one. You learn how to navigate your relationship with your subject matter. It's kind of like a courtship. You're learning about this object that you've decided or that has picked you. You either picked your muse or your muse picked you, and you're working on that and becoming a master of it. Now, if you were only doing one painting of a house, you might really want to learn all the details. Or maybe it's like, I'm never going to paint a house again. I'm going to use a projector or I'm going to cut out a stencil or whatever. For me, stenciling was a carryover from years ago when I was an airbrush artist. Doing a stencil to help contain where the airbrush paint was going to give a crisp edge, and also having that in case maybe there were more designs in the future of it. Never ended up happening. And when I started painting in watercolor, I was not initially doing setups, but as I got a studio and I was like, oh my God, I got to put together a gathering of work, and just I was trying to find shortcuts. I was trying to speed things up. So for a while, I was doing the courtship. I was learning the nuances, and I was doing a really nice drawing. But the really nice drawing was on this piece of paper, and then here's my watercolor paper. I was like, oh, I don't want to redraw that. So I would photocopy it, shrink it down to the right size or enlarge it, and then use a light table to transfer it over. Well, at least in those cases, I had done the work. I had learned the nuances of my subject. But over time, I was like, what's the point? And I was just tracing, or I was just doing the cutouts as things got bigger than the 11 by 17 paper. I would put sheets together, or I would use my projector. And the difference is if you're doing it as a crutch, that's not good. Crutches are only meant to be temporary. And but if you've done the work and then you're projecting your own drawing, there's nothing wrong with that. Um, Even Michelangelo did. He would do his drawings for the Sistine Chapel. He would do his studies, and then he would enlarge them and do what's a cartoon, a giant drawing on paper, and then he would poke holes in the paper, lay that paper on the plaster, or his assistants would put it on the plaster, and then he would use a pounce bag, which is like a little bag. Think of whatever the 1500s equivalent of pantyhose, but it was filled with charcoal, and he would transfer that charcoal onto the wet plaster through that piece of paper. But the scale of those drawings was so big, and he wouldn't be able to get down and get the perspective and things like that because the plaster had to stay wet. But too much about that. it's not always a cheat. And I would say if you're doing the groundwork, if you're doing the relationship work, if you're learning the nuances of your subject matter, or you paint your subject matter all the time, well, if you paint it all the time, you're just going to get to the point where you can just bang it out and just draw it on the paper. Another problem with tracing, cutouts, projector, all that, I think that there's a mindset shift. Like it's almost like, oh, this has to be perfect. Whereas when you're doing the drawing yourself, I don't know. There's maybe a confidence there that, oh, if I mess it up, I can do it again because I'm doing this right now. Or I don't know. There's just for me, there's a mental gap there when I'm working on something that I've traced. I'm like really rigid. But if I just sit there and do these quick little color studies, I did a painting for a gift. I'll put up. I'll grab the picture, I guess. I did this little dog, and I just did a quick sketch, and make sure it's showing up. Okay, did a quick sketch, and it does have its tongue hanging out. It does. The poor little guy had all his teeth removed, so his tongue just falls out of his mouth. I call it Derpy Dog. I came to really like this little dog when I was painting it. So this was the first one I did, but the paper I did it on, I just was really doing it as practice, but it turned out so good. I was like, darn it, I wish I had done this on good paper. So now I'm trying to just reserve my crappy paper for value studies, and then just, testing, swatches as I'm in the middle of a painting, because I like the way this paper performs, but I don't like the way it looks. It has a very car tire or shoe tread pattern, and it's not a good pattern. And I don't blame the paper maker for doing that, because they want you to buy their premium paper to do, commissioned works, or real work. So I keep this to remind me, like, hey, you can draw better than you think, and sometimes you're going to mess up, but do the work. Do the work. Practice is not the work. Theory is not the work. The work is the work. And I am now at this point where I need to do the sketching. I need to do deliberate drawing practice of things that I'm not going to paint, but that will teach me nuance. Like John Singer Sargent said something about painting flowers as a way to learn about other objects, painting the nuance of, you know, drapery. This is why they had people, I mean, back in his time and prior to that, people were wearing flowing gowns and stuff like that. So that you really needed to learn those things. But once you did it, once you were at your atelier for 7 years and all you ever did was draw, and now they've given you a paintbrush, you can draw with that paintbrush. And a lot of people don't realize that. And in this video, I just draw with the paintbrush. Um, so try that out. Try out a different tool. I think we're just kind of convinced through school that you draw with pencils and you paint with brushes. Well, you can draw with a paintbrush, and you should really try to give it a go, because when you're in there, um, there are certain details that you can put in. Like in my case, working on architecture right now, I can just give a little fling here and create the illusion that there's a transition between vertical to a piece of crown molding, or there's a glint of light in the windowsill, or whatever it is. But it's learning your subject matter and then learning to do more with the tools that you have. And so that's where I am with my practice. Now for you, are you doing something because you admired somebody else doing it and you've kind of been doing that, but it's not your thing? Or did you do something because you needed to do 30 of something, so you needed to become efficient, but that efficiency has kind of hobbled you, which is how I feel about, the fact that for almost a year I've been painting uh, almost exclusively painting things that I didn't actually draw, I traced. And I realistically don't have um, a relationship with the subject matter. And I don't mean a relationship like, oh, yeah, I've been to the house. I mean, just understanding the nuance. And this firehouse that's in here, I've, uh, I have 4 different videos. I mean, and in this case, in my first art and mindset podcast, I talked about chasing the dragon. Like my bucking bronco turned out so well that I did another one and another one and another one. That is not why I'm doing multiples of this firehouse. It's learning the subject matter, learning how to depict certain things. And then those 4 paintings, what I learned about this one subject will help in certain areas of another subject. And I would say after painting a couple of Victorian houses, a couple of, whatever era, this kind of building, that kind of building, once you get this background going, this portfolio built of all these different buildings, then your study time, your courtship with that subject is shortened, and it just becomes less and less. And then you learn how to bring out the best in a certain kind of architecture, what to focus on. And then as people see it, if you're showing your work publicly, as people see it, they'll let you know the elements that they like. Oh, I love how you lit this turret, and I love that I can see the reflection off of this glass. And then you might look and be like, man, I spent so much time on that dentile molding and nobody said a word about it. So learning what captures the people's eye and what makes things convincing. Those are the real important things, because I'll go back to John Singer Sargent again. John Singer Sargent didn't paint fingers on hands. He just painted hands. And at 10 feet away, they look like they have fingers, because people fill in the blanks. People know that hands, 99.99% of the time, have fingers. So learning what you can leave out or what you can hint at. I mean, having a hand and just 1, 2, 3 little lines and then the separation. If you just have a little dash here, but not here, that might be enough to create the illusion of a hand. Um, and if you're having troubles seeing that, um, take a picture of something far away with your cell phone and then zoom in on it and see how the camera has made it look. The petals of a flower is just very little variation, but then when you zoom back out, you see that. Or a hand, you might be like, oh, that clearly has fingers, and then you zoom in on it and it's just 3 colors: highlight, midtone, shadow, highlight, midtone, shadow, but no definitive line. And when I was in silk screening, I had a really hard time with that, with the line, because they wanted the line drawn in, but that was because of the limitations of the medium of screen printing. It wasn't because that was the artistic style. It was kind of a necessary evil of screen printing. So, but if you're just painting and you're painting direct, if you want to paint fingers, that's fine. I'm just saying you don't have to. Learning what's in there. If you are trying to give an impression, if you're trying to have a painterly look, if you want the essence of something without all of the detail, these are things to learn. And again, what practices have you picked up? What habits have you developed that have now plateaued you and created a glass ceiling in your practice? That's what you need to look at. And maybe you haven't, but maybe, just maybe, you'll find a benefit from, no matter what you do, whether you're an abstract artist, whether you're realism, whether you're an impressionist, colorist, tonalist, whatever it is, trying something different, working in black and white. And okay, what in this black and white, how can I convey the light, the dark, the shadow? How do I get my, like in my case with drawing, first I'm starting with site sizing. I'm just saying, okay, this photograph is an 8 by 10, and my piece of paper is an 8 by 10, or my picture area on this 11 by 14 is an 8 by 10. And so I say, okay, the rooftop's here. I just go straight across. All right, there's my rooftop. Now there's a windowsill here. Go straight across. There's the windowsill. And then that's this far over. It's 3 inches over. Okay, over here I go 3 inches over. And so I'm learning spatial relationships there, but it's still a little bit of a crutch. Then removing the site size and making it actually bigger and learning the spatial relationship. Okay, this window is this big. The next window over is half that size, and it's straight down and over from that, and then keep moving around, and then get 3 items, triangulate that, and then add a 4th item, and starting again with the big shapes and distilling it down to the smaller shapes. And the big shape being the facade of a building, the little shape being the dentile molding, which in real life is like a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square and a 1/2 inch in between it and the next one. Is that detail going to really show up in a painting that's an 8 by 10? No, it's not. So distilling down what is important, what's not important, and really working with light and shadow. What's my lightest? What's my darkest? Things like that. What will create that atmosphere? Um, if you're shooting for an atmospheric approach, if you're shooting for more realistic approach, it doesn't necessarily mean detail. It means um, color choices and color transitions, but you might still be able to skip that. If you're an abstract painter and you're stuck, um, maybe do what Picasso did with. There's a video of him distilling down a bull. He draws a bull, the horn, the tail, everything. Then he draws another version and he skips a part, draws another version. Whatever it is, there are plenty of things out there, but if you're stuck, you might be stuck for any number of reasons. But mine is pursuing perfection rather than excellence. I think I'm trying to do the best I can to impress upon viewers. Whereas if I did 4 videos that reached a few hundred people rather than one video with a really good thing that only reaches 10 people, I'm of better service doing more videos, and then that brushwork, that gym time, that whatever way you look at it, eventually will pay off. I mentioned in the first podcast the clay pots, or the photography project, whatever it probably never really happened, but what it said was that the quantity of repetitions led to quality later down the line, learning the nuance of your craft. So the more you draw, the better you'll get. Now, the more you draw bad, the more you draw poorly, the more ingrained that'll be. So you really have to have good checks and balances. You might do the drawing, but then you have an 8 by 10 over here, and you just lay it behind your painting, and you see on your light table, or on your sliding glass door or whatever, you look and see, okay, how close did I get it, and or how much better does it look? I mean, maybe being dead on and accuracy isn't as important to you. I've seen plenty of painters out there that don't really. I mean, Monet was not known as a draftsman, and there are modern painters whose names I'm not going to mention because I don't want it to be taken as a knock. But they don't. They have very vibrant colors. They have okay proportions, okay perspective, and they're successful because they have a look. So I guess that's another question that's only between you and you. So I hope that this more singular topic doesn't seem quite as rambly. I have so much to talk about, but I want to keep the videos kind of short. So whether you're listening to the podcast, watching the video, or doing a little bit of both, I mean, listen in the car, kind of get an idea, think about it, and then when you're done with work, go home and watch the video and say, "Oh, yeah, I've gotten a little rusty with drawing," or "Oh, that's a good idea. I never really thought of that," or whatever. I'm not looking for accolades. I'm just saying that to get the most of it, you might want to consume it just a little bit more, and have, like I said, have that thought provoking listen in the car on the way to work or on the way back home, and then watch the video and see. And um, I'm hoping that being able to do that reaches more people and also gives more to you from both a philosophical and a practical hands-on standpoint, because getting better at your craft, no matter what it is a good thing. I mean, whether you're a painter or a sculptor, a musician, having those moments, those magic moments, is great. And I realized, again, like I've already said, that I was cheating myself of magic moments by tracing, by sitting down and drawing. You've got a magic moment right there. You're learning the nuance of your subject. And then drawing it onto paper, knowing, what to leave out and what to put in. And then when you're actually doing the painting, it's like, oh, I don't need to put that in here, or, oh, this curves right here, and, oh, this right here. And you've kind of brought it all together. And you've also hit a trifecta of that dopamine hit, that flow state, that magic moment. And that's what it's really about. It's about having that process that you love, and then realizing that the painting is not as important as the discipline. Your physique when you go to the gym is great, especially when you're 30 or 20 and you're in that dating age, or you're looking for somebody, or you're wanting to impress. But the real benefit comes 30 years later, 40 years later, when you have your health and your fitness, because you had a deliberate practice, you had discipline, you maintained it, and you realized that the journey was the destination. Having your reward system into, you walk out of the gym and you give yourself a mental high five. You finish a drawing and you give yourself a mental high five. You go through some keys or whatever musically, and you finally hit that. You got the timing right. Give yourself a high five. It's going through that process. And then in closing, I want to say, don't worry about speed initially, even though I'm kind of practicing for the Plein Air Quick Draws, but speed will come. There's a saying, I think it's the Army that has it: slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And eventually, as you learn to push yourself a little bit quicker, things will start to click and you'll be like, oh, I remember that. I remember that. Ooh, time is closing in, and that tension, but that ability to work at a level slightly higher than yesterday, slightly faster than the day before, and everything comes together. That is flow state. And that is the magic of the moment. That's the meditative moment. For me, I used to do meditation, and I still do occasionally if I'm foggy or whatever, but for the most part, my meditation comes when I do a sketch, when I draw my drawing onto paper, or when I'm in the process of painting and I just decide to just cut loose. That's my meditative state. That's my reward, is in that deliberate practice. So I'm hoping that this video podcast has helped you through that a little bit in your own, or has made you hearken back to, you know what, I used to enjoy this more, and the problem isn't X, it's Y, or it's X, Y, and Z. Um, so please, if you have a friend that you think would benefit from some mindset work, like, hey, you know, this guy's talking about art, but it also applies to going to the gym, or you know, it applies to not just to painters, but sculptors and musicians. Please forward this to a friend. Like, share, subscribe, and until next time, lovely to see you again, my friend.